Hello everyone, welcome back to the contemporary world. Today's lesson is all about the global cities. Now, in our previous lessons, we have looked at how ideas of internationalism shaped the world politics. And we also examined kanang mga cultural movements like kanang anime and mga K-pop, and how they spread through the media like the internet. So what this lesson will emphasize, however, is that globalization is spatial. So this statement can mean two things. So when I say globalization is spatial, it doesn't mean nga parehaan ng naka-spatial someone, but it basically means nga globalization occurs in physical spaces. For example, you can see foreign investments and capital move through cities, and especially kanang na mga companies who build skyscrapers, di ba? And people also who are working in businesses or kanang mga Filipino who are working abroad, they start to purchase or they even rent mga high-rise condo units and better homes, no? So as all these events happen, more people are driven out of city centers so that they can make way for new developments. Now, second, what makes globalization move is the fact that it is based in places. So, for example, kanang sa Los Angeles, sa California. So that is the home of Hollywood, where movies are made for global consumption. So the main headquarters of Sony is in Tokyo, and from there the company coordinates the sale of its various electronic goods to branches across the world. So in other words, cities act on globalization and globalization acts on cities. So they are the sites as well as the mediums of globalization. Just as the internet enables and shapes global forces, so do cities do as well. So as with every lesson, we must first define our topic. But in defining the global city, it is not as simple as one would seem. Sociologist Saskia Sassen popularized the term global city in the 1990s. Now, ang iyang criteria para magka-global city ta is primarily economic. Okay? So, sa iyang work, she initially identified three global cities. New York, London, and Tokyo. All of which are hubs for global finance and capitalism. Now, these three cities are home, for instance, of the world's top stock exchange markets, where investors buy and sell shares in major corporations. So, New York has the New York Stock Exchange, London has the Financial Times Stock Exchange, and Tokyo has Nikkei. So, the amount of money traded in these markets is staggering. Now, for example, sa New York Stock Exchange, the value of shares they are trading is about mga 19,300 billion. While kanang sa Philippine Stock Exchange, ang ato ang gitrade dere is only about 231.3 billion. So, limiting the discussion of global cities to these three metropolises, however, is proving more and more restrictive. The global economy has changed significantly since Sassen wrote her book, and any account of economic power of cities today must take note of the latest developments. So, recent commentators expanded the criteria that Sassen used to determine what constitutes a global city. So, although it is not as wealthy as New York, movie-making Mecca Los Angeles can now rival New York's cultural influence. And San Francisco must be factored in as another global city because it is home of the most powerful internet companies, Facebook, Twitter, and Google. Finally, the growth of the Chinese economy has turned cities like Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangzhou into centers of trade and finance. So the Chinese government reopened the Shanghai Stock Exchange in the late 1990s, and since then it has grown to become the fifth largest stock market in the world. Others consider some cities global simply because they are great places to live in. In Australia, Sydney commands the greatest proportion of capital. However, Melbourne is described as Sydney's rival global city because many magazines and lists have now referred to it as the world's most livable city. It has a place with good public transportation, a thriving cultural scene, and a relatively easy pace of life. So defining a global city can thus be difficult. One way of solving this dilemma is to go beyond the simple dichotomy of global and non-global. Instead of asking whether or not one city is a global city, it is better to ask in which ways are cities global and to which extent are they global. But if you're going to be a stickler for definitions, then we can have one working definition wherein a global city is an urban center that enjoys significant competitive advantages and that serve as a hub within a globalized economic system. So with that, we must find out the indicators of a global city. So the foremost characteristic of a global city is that it has to have economic power. So Sassen remains correct in saying that economic power largely determines which cities are global. So New York may have the largest stock market in the world, but Tokyo houses the most number of corporate headquarters. Shanghai may have a smaller stock market compared to New York and Tokyo, but plays a critical role in the global economic supply chain ever since China has become the manufacturing center of the world. Shanghai has the world's busiest container port, moving over 33 million container units in 2013. So economic opportunities in a global city make it attractive to talents from across the world. Now, since the 1970s, many of the top IT programmers and engineers from Asia have moved to San Francisco Bay Area to become some of the key figures in Silicon Valley's technology boom. London remains a preferred destination for Filipinos with nursing degrees. Next, there must be economic competitiveness. So to measure the economic competitiveness of a city, the Economist Intelligence Unit has added other criteria like market size, purchasing power of the citizens, size of the middle class, and potential for growth. Now, based on these criteria, tiny Singapore is considered Asia's most competitive city because of its strong market, efficient and incorruptible government, and livability. It also houses the regional office of many major global corporations. Global cities are also centers of authority. So Washington, D.C. may not be as wealthy as New York, but it is the seat of American state power. People around the world know its major landmarks, the White House, the Capitol Building, the Supreme Court, and the Lincoln Memorial, and the Washington Monument. So similarly, compared with Sydney and Melbourne, Canberra is a sleepy town and thus is not as attractive to tourists. But as Australia's political capital, it is home to the country's top politicians, bureaucrats, and political advisors, or policy advisors rather. So the cities that house major international organizations may also be considered centers of political influence. The headquarters of the United Nations is in New York, and that of the European Union is in Brussels. An influential political city near the Philippines is Jakarta, which is not just the capital of Indonesia, but also the location of the main headquarters of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So powerful political hubs exert influence on their own countries as well as on international affairs. So the European Central Bank, which oversees the euro, is based in Frankfurt. A decision made in that city can therefore affect the political economy of an entire continent and beyond. So finally, no, usak sa mga indicators aning global city is they are centers of higher learning and culture. So kanang intellectual influence sa city, makita na siya sa influence sa publishing industry. Now, kalagmitan sa mga libro nga ginabasa nato, no, ginapublish na siya sa mga lugar like New York, London, or diba sa Paris. So kanang New York Times no, gadala na siya sa ngalan sa New York City. Pero dili ra kana siya local newspaper, no? People read it not just across America but also all over the world. Now also kanang usa sa mga hinungdan no nganong nay mga turista mo bisita ana sa Boston, no, Boston, Massachusetts. Now it's because they want to see Harvard University, which is the world's top university. Now, usapod ka example anang higher culture of learning is kanang sa Australia. Now, many Asian teenagers are moving to cities in Australia because of the leading English language universities there. So education is currently Australia's third largest export, just behind coal and iron ore. And significantly, it's ahead of tourism. Now, in 2015, the Australian government reported that it made as much as 19.2 billion Australian dollars from education alone. Now also, no, we have already explained why Los Angeles is the center of American film industry, and it may be considered as a global city as well. Now, another less obvious example is Copenhagen. Muna siya capital sa Denmark, no? So, it is so small that one can tour the entire city by bicycle in 30 minutes. So, it is not home of any kanang major stock market, or ang iyang population is rather homogeneous. Pero Copenhagen is now kanang gi-consider na siya as a culinary capital of the world. Kay iyang mga top restaurants no incommensurate with its size. Now it is also kanang birthplace po ni siya of kanang ginatawag og new Nordic cuisine. No, so Copenhagen has set into motion various culinary trends like foraging the forests for local ingredients. So basically, mora to siya some of the examples anang centers of higher learning and culture, cities which are centers of for higher learning and culture. So today, kanang mga global cities, they have become quite culturally diverse, no? So in a global city, you can try cuisines from different parts of the world because of their large Turkish populations. For example, sa Berlin o sa Tokyo, they offer some of the best Turkish food one can find outside of Turkey. So, kung mauna-una po Manila is not very global because of the dearth of foreign residents, no? But Singapore is because it has a very high population of foreigners, more or less mga 38%. So, karon atong i-discuss ng mga challenges of global cities. So kanang mga global cities, no, they conjure up images of kanang mga fast-paced, exciting, or maybe mga cosmopolitan lifestyles as well. Pero such descriptions are lacking. No, kay kaning mga global cities, napo ni sila ilang mga negative aspects. No, they can be sites of great inequality and poverty, as well as kanang tremendous violence. No? Pero although na ay problema ng mga global cities, cities can still be sustainable because of their density. Now, naay mga ecologists that have mentioned or that have found out that by concentrating their populations in smaller areas, cities and metros decrease human encroachment on natural habitats. So basically, no, kung magdasok ng mga tao og puloy-an, di na sila manghilabot atong mga natural habitat sa mga animals. Okay? So denser settlement patterns yield energy savings. Apartment buildings, for example, are more efficient to heat and cool than detached suburban houses. So, moreover, kanang mga syudad nga naay mga extensive public transportation systems, kanang mga tao di na kay na sila manistil mag-drive, no? So, in that they cut carbon emissions. So, di na ka matingala nganong kanang pareha sa New York City, no? Extensive man ang ilahang train system. So they have one of the lowest per capita carbon footprint in the United States. Sa Asia, napo tayo nga sa mga syudad like Singapore ug sa Tokyo, no? Mayo po ng ilahang transportation system. So they also have relatively low per capita carbon footprints. Pero dili tanang city parehaan ang sa New York ug sa Tokyo. No, as we mentioned, Mecca naman for entertainment ang Los Angeles, and it is also an urban sprawl. Dagko kay ng ilahang mga freeway dito. Yan, napugos po ng ilang mga residente o gasto para sa mga auto o gasolina. Kay napoy mga syudad pareha sa Manila, sa Bangkok, no, o sa Mumbai. Dasok po kayo na sila dito, dense po kayo na sila. Unya, kulang-kulang po nilang public transportation. Ilang gobyerno pod minus pod mo regulate anang ilahang car industries, mao nang polluted po kayo na sila, very polluted, no? So, because of the sheer size of city populations across the world, it is not surprising that urban areas consume most of the world's energies. Cities only cover 2% of the world's landmass but consume 78% of global energy. Therefore, if carbon emissions must be cut to prevent global warming, this massive energy consumption in cities must be curbed. So if more food can be grown with less water in denser spaces, cities will begin to become greener. So usa ka problema po daning mga global cities, no, kay naapoy mga major terror attacks nga nahitabo in recent years. So cities, especially kanang naay mga global influence or kanang mga centers of trade, no, they are obvious targets for terrorists due to their high populations and their role as symbols of globalization. Kay kanang mga terorista kalagmitan di na sila ganahan og globalization. So kanang same attributes nga maka-attract sa mga workers ug mga migrants, no, mo po na siya ay himo og potential target sa mga violente nga terorista. So if maglantaw ta sa history, no, katong mga atake sa 9/11 or katong sa September 11, 2001 that brought down the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York, and katopong sa November 2015 coordinated attacks dito sa Paris by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant or ISIL, no? Muna sila ay mga resulta pod anang sa global cities nga attention nga ilang gidala. So just to summarize the challenges of the global cities, they are basically some cities force residents to spend money on cars and gas. Some cities lack public transportation. Some city governments have the inability to regulate their car industries. Urban areas consume most of the world's energy, and major terror attacks target these cities. So, muna siya ang summary sa mga problema or mga challenges sa global cities. So, as part of the challenges po na sa mga global cities po, no, nago tayo makita nga duality sa mga rich urban cities, no? So, we have consistently stated nga kanang economic globalization has paved the way for massive inequality. So, this phenomenon is thus very pronounced in cities. So some large cities, particularly those in Scandinavia, have found ways to mitigate inequality through state-led social redistribution programs. Pero naay mga ubang mga cities, particularly sa mga developing countries, no, they are the sites of contradiction. So in places like Mumbai, Jakarta, and Manila, it is common to find pareha ang inyong makita sa inyong screen, no, mga gleaming buildings alongside mga massive shanty towns. So kani siya muni siya ang duality nga makita nimo sa rich urban cities. So kanang sa mga outskirts of cities like New York and San Francisco, no, there are poor urban enclaves. Now they are occupied by impoverished families. Slowly, they are being forced to move away from the economic centers of their cities. As a city attracts more capital and richer residents, real estate prices go up and poor residents are forced to relocate to far away but cheaper areas. So, kani siya nga phenomenon, muna siya gitawag og gentrification. Pero, in cities like San Francisco, no, people have observed that gentrification is no longer the case. Kay tungod, ang ilahang problema na po dito is galabi na po ang mga homeless people. Tungod ana mga policy sa ilahang government, no, nga murag napoy uban nga catch and release ra po ng ilahang judicial system. So ang nahitabo, ang labi na ng mga mentally ill, katong mga baligya og drugs, katong mga bayolente nga mga homeless nga mga tawo, nara po diha galakwatsa sa ilahang mga wealthy neighborhoods. So dili na siya ingong gentrified kaayo ning mga lugara. So in most of the world's global cities, now the middle class is also thinning out. So globalization creates high-income jobs that are concentrated in global cities. So these high earners, in turn, generate demand for an unskilled labor force that will attend to their increasing needs. Meanwhile, many middle-income jobs in manufacturing and business process outsourcing, like mga call centers, no, they are moving to other countries. So that's why if you've noticed, katong sa kaning diri sa Dumaguete, no, daghan na kay tag mga BPO nga companies. So this sort of practice, no, is hollowing out or nagkawala na ang middle class in global cities. So this has heightened the inequality within them. So in places like New York, there are high-rolling American investment bankers whose children are raised by Filipina maids. So a large global city may thus be a paradise for some, but a purgatory for others. So to conclude, no, global cities are sites and mediums of globalization. They are, therefore, material representations of the phenomenon. Now, through them, we see the best of globalization since they are places that create exciting fusion of cultures and ideas. They also generate wealth. However, they remain sites of great inequality, where global servants serve global entrepreneurs. So that ends our lesson on global cities. I will see you on our next video, no, which is about the environmental problems and sustainable development. So thank you again for listening to our lesson today. I will see you on the next video.